Thank you for coming today. I am Jeff Erb. I'm the Preservation Association of Lincoln president. And I would like to thank all of our members for joining us today. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to do great lecture series like this one. So I want to thank you for your membership. PAL is completely supported by membership and donors like you. And that is how we fund all of our operations, our brown bag lecture series like this, our private events. And so we'd very much like it, if you're not a member today, to consider joining our organization. And it's very affordable. Our entry-level membership is just $30 annually, so it's very affordable. And right now we're doing a fall membership drive, and you can join. If you joined our $50 level or higher during our fall drive, you will actually get a free gift. I've got an example of it right here. It's a nice canvas bag with our logo on it, a little bit of shameless advertising. And if you are interested in joining today, we can actually take your check today, I imagine. Gordon, is that right? We could take a check today, and you can take a bag home today. If you would prefer to join online, I have some cards here with instructions on exactly how to do that. You can get to our website and join with a card or send us a check. So thank you all for coming today and supporting PAL.
And on joining online, you can also go to preservelincoln.org to join. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name's Eileen Burke and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. The Preservation Association of Lincoln is sponsoring the taping of today's program. Our speaker today is Ed Zimmer. Ed was a historic preservation planner in Lincoln, the city and county government from 1985 to 2020. Since retiring, Ed remains an active community historian and volunteer. He recently finished 2 books, the third and final volume of the Near South Walking Tour book, and a book that he worked on with Jim McKee on Lincoln postcards. Ed is native to Omaha, Nebraska, and has an undergraduate degree from Lindenwood College and a PhD from Boston University. Ed's talk today is on the several careers of Harry F. Cunningham. Please join me in welcoming Ed.
I'm grateful to have so many Cunninghams present. If I am counting correctly, it's the same number of my birth family, 9. Somebody can check me on that, because one way I gather information is to state things incorrectly in public, and then you bring me improved information along the way. So this is part of my research exercise. Cunningham was born in 1888 in Washington, D.C. Unless you trust his passport, which says 1885, but it's carved in stone at Wyuka as 1888, so that's the date I use. His father was a newspaper man of a sort. He was a cartoonist and illustrator for Washington, D.C. newspapers. One account has him retiring from that business after he had achieved national prominence, which is a great rabbit hole for somebody else to go down. It's not architectural history, and so I really am going to try to avoid finding any more Joseph Harry Cunningham drawings, but I did find, working for the Washington Post when our Harry is a baby, this would be about 1893, they build a new building and illustrate it for this flashy cover, and then there's a little article that says, credits the page to a different illustrator. It says, but the frontispiece of our new building is by J. Harry Cunningham. And the illustrations of the interior are by Cunningham. So we can see on the whole page or zeroing in on their own building, that apparently is Father Cunningham's work. See, I've learned these work better if you turn them on. You'll find several illustrations inside that edition that would also be Father Cunningham's drawings, and to me evidence quite a bit of interest in architecture, because he's obviously studying hard and replicating these elements. And there's several more in that edition as well, individual offices and some other interior features of that building. I haven't found any of his cartoons, but this will stand in for part of the artistic heritage of R. Harry F. Cunningham. When his parents, Joseph Harry and Theodora, celebrate their 12th wedding silver wedding anniversary, so that would be 25th, I believe. In 1912, there's a mention that Harry had inherited his artistic talent from his father. When he's at the University of Nebraska in the early 1930s, there's a mention that his mother had him drawing by the time he was 4, much to the disgust of his journalistic father. So somewhere between those two, or maybe they're both accurate, he seems to inherit from both parents and some artistic bent. And his father goes on after journalism, the newspaper work, to have a printing company. And his mother's giving lectures at various social groups in Washington, D.C. on the latest improvements in illustration, photogravure and halftones. So she's got some expertise in the field as well. So I think it is a mutual inheritance. Here he goes on to high school in Washington, D.C., which happens then to be mentioned almost every time anything is said about him, that he's a graduate of McKinley Manual Training School. This was their spectacular new building, built only in 1902, and he's a graduate of 1905, so he apparently is in about the first class to go through the full course at this academic and industrial arts school. This was the white manual training school in Washington, D.C. There was a black school as well with a similar curriculum, but he attended McKinley. It also gives a sense of the scale of something he's used to from home, which was large and significant. And this in fact, was a building designed by Henry Ives Cobb, very nationally prominent architect from Chicago, who did some work in Omaha as well. And I always am drawing things back into Nebraska architectural history, because that's where I put this stuff on that page I do with Dave Murphy called Placemakers of Nebraska. And Cobb's is there for a couple projects in Omaha. There's a cadet program at McKinley, and our H.F. Cunningham is a captain of the high school cadets, and they have marching competitions against other high schools and give us this wonderful portrait of him as about a 16, 17-year-old. And then we get mention, and the frequency that he is mentioned in the Washington Post and the Washington Star maybe has to do with his father being a newspaper man, or maybe everybody got in the paper all the time, but I kind of doubt it. But there are lots of these little mentions. This one, erroneous, sometimes things in print are wrong, and we see it even here. He didn't go to Washington High School, he went to McKinley Manual Training High School, but Washington was the larger and all-academic high school in D.C. But it mentions he's going to be sort of interning right after graduating. He's going to be on a railroad surveying party, or an engineering party. By the end of the summer, it mentions that it's a surveying crew in Pennsylvania that he had worked on that summer, and that he's now on his way off to Worcester, Massachusetts, to the School of Technology, which actually called itself Worcester Polytech Institute, or WPI. If I hadn't found the high school picture, I would think this high school guy going off to a different state to this big institution must be sort of awestruck. Not necessarily if you're coming from McKinley Manual Training School. That seemed to be awesome in itself. He has one semester here, and it's then mentioned every time he's looking back, or anybody else is looking back at his career. It's mentioned whenever all the early documents about his beginning the architecture program at University of Nebraska, that he had no college degree at all. He had one semester, I think, here in Worcester. For the newspaper getting things wrong, you can find a Boston Globe account from this fall of 1905 that says that he marries a woman in North Andover. He's 17, and they honeymoon and then return to, and it gives a specific address that they're going to occupy in North Andover, and it gives the address of her parents. And that family did live at that address, but apparently it's not Harry Francis Cunningham. It's a man named Henry Francis Cunningham of early 30s, and it has nothing to do with our man. But in the newspaper, it exactly is about our man, and you just have to work your way around that. But for whatever reason, he attends one semester, he comes home for Christmas, and doesn't go back. By the spring of '06, he's accepting a position with General Electric in Schenectady, New York, and that doesn't seem to stick either, because by that fall, he's appointed to a post with the supervising architect of the Treasury back in D.C., which is a big, big architectural office at the time. James Knox Taylor was the supervising architect of the Treasury for that span of years. This is about 1906, 1907. He's probably with that office for 3 or 4 years. It's hard to tell exactly. But we do find he gets a bump in pay from $1,000 a year to $1,200 a year in about 1908. So he's advancing right along. He's now, by then, he is a married man and he needs it. But Taylor had a very busy career. He's in the office second longest of any of the supervising architects, 15 years. Many of the supervising architects' tenure is 1, 2, or 3 years. But Taylor's there from 97 to 1912, and that's the second longest tenure of anyone in that office. He does about a dozen substantial post offices or post office courthouses in Nebraska alone. And Cunningham doesn't have a Nebraska connection yet, but we do, so I look at Taylor in that light. But he did post offices, he built the one in South Omaha, which is still a post office there, Blair, Hastings, Norfolk. He builds Lincoln's, what we would call Old Fed or Grand Manse, the first portion of that. The east end of it is James Knox Taylor's work. About at the time when Cunningham is in the office, Grand Island, York, Columbus, Plattsmouth, Kearney, an extension in Beatrice, Fairbury, Holdridge, and North Platte. All of those in Nebraska during this time of Taylor's term. Whether Cunningham, as a draftsman, presumably at the boards in the office, is involved in any of those, we aren't to know. But looking just at a couple of what's going on in Nebraska out of that office during Cunningham's tenure there, York, Kearney's post office courthouse that now is the Museum of Nebraska Art is a Taylor of that era, and here it is under construction about at the time that Cunningham's in the office. And then the Lincoln post office, and it's 1907. That building, in placemakers, we date buildings by when they start to be designed to when the architect's no longer involved, as best we can tell. So then, when I say a span of 1902 to 1907 on the Lincoln building, it's not out of the ground yet, and it's well finished by 1907, but they're still sending drawings, and this wonderful drawing of the electric light posts they're going to put at the Lincoln post office is 1907, and that's about when Cunningham's in the office. He marries Catherine Mary. They married in Fall Creek, Virginia, and they're going to reside in Washington, D.C., and this is 1907. And he's very active in the architecture clubs of DC, the AIA of DC, and he's often referred to as a Washington boy. Right up to the time he's a captain of machine guns in the U.S. Army in World War I, Washington boy. I didn't write it, I only can do the clippings. But he's quite successful in these drawing competitions. He competes in a drawing competition that the New Jersey AIA holds and wins for a design of a single-family home. And he also wins with the birth of Harry F. Cunningham, Jr., this wonderful little newspaper clip of a nice little boy, about 4 years old in this picture. His dad is now moving on to private architecture offices in D.C., Wood, Dunn, and Deming for one, Clark Wagaman, and then has his own partnership with a man named Edward Bullock from about 1915 to 1917. And then on Find a Grave, thank you to someone who posted this splendid, even clearer picture of that nice little boy, who I think would be your father. Yes. Yeah.
I'm Andrew Cunningham.
So I point that this is participation, and I like to illustrate my lectures, and when I can illustrate them with living people, it's even better. He also, with two other young architects, undertakes quite an ambitious project to go around the DC area and measure Georgian architecture and then draw it up, and they publish this lavish small book of these drawings in 1914. Which also suggests to me that maybe he doesn't have a whole lot of work on the boards in the architecture firms. This must be quite a laborious process. It's about, it's a couple dozen buildings that they measure and draw in about a 50-page kind of little pamphlet booklet. This is one of his. There's credits on these both for who measured, and he and Mr. Younger, one of his partners in this project, had measured the courthouse, and then he did this drawing. And also did St. John's Episcopal, and this Cunningham claims as his own work. And they're looking at the lead late 18th and early 19th century architects of the DC area. So this is Latrobe, and they do other Latrobe buildings as well. He also competes in national drafting contests and competitions. White Pine Bureau was a trade group promoting the use of white pine, particularly in residential construction, and they held a big competition for drawings from young architects of houses, single-family houses that could be built for $10,000. So these are affordable, semi-affordable of their day, at least according to the architect estimating the cost of building their work. And this was, the Architectural Review then published a couple dozen of the 250-some competition drawings submitted to the White Pine Bureau, and this was published in the Architectural Review of 1916. And the quality of all the drawings, Cunningham's among them, but the overall quality of the drafting of those published designs is pretty extraordinary. Perspectives and renderings alike, elevations, plans, and perspectives. And these are the 2 pages that Cunningham got, including this partial elevation with a southern bell at the front door. And then there's very erudite commentary on the drawings, and they praise the good characteristics and say, but on this drawing, the upper bathrooms are in no way organized to align with the plumbing of the first floor, and that just wouldn't work, and that many neighbors might find it objectionable that the servant's porch, and that's on the little wing to the left, faces the main street, that probably would be found objectionable as well. Then for some reason, 1917, and we can discern from the newspapers maybe some reasons, but I'm not going there because if you get one little clipping, and he's married at age 17 in Massachusetts, and it just isn't so, I'm not going to interpret court cases off one clipping. But he takes a job in Cleveland. And all we get in Cleveland is 1 year's city directory reference that he's a draftsman at a specific address in the Rose Building. But it's a lovely directory, and you can go to the architect's page in that directory and trace your way down through who's in the Rose Building, and there is a firm at the same address. I don't know that he's sleeping in his office, but it's the only address listed for him in the directory, and it's the Briggs and Nelson architecture firm in this magnificent downtown Cleveland building. So it seems to be who he's drawing for. I don't know that he drew on this project, but it is it's on the boards at Briggs and Nelson when he's there, 1916, 1917, a big Christian Science church, and quite a lovely drawing of it. And that church still stands. It's now a Pentecostal church, but that big, ambitious church building is still there. And there's at least a little current of Cunningham running through that office at this moment. But what he really, in his multiple careers, he's going back to his cadet days, except this is no longer marching around in competition to other high school boys. He enlists in the U.S. Army from Ohio. And it's mentioned in the Washington paper. He's commissioned as a captain, and his assignment becomes machine guns. And in fact, he's the instructor at a machine gun school in Ohio. In this Washington, the Evening Star account, it gives a little bit of his background and what firms, private firms he had come through. And this is also the one that mentions he had gone off to Cleveland about 1916. And I wonder at why a 29-year-old who's being commissioned as an Army captain is still referred to in the newspaper accounts as a Washington boy, but his high school is also mentioned in this article. And I think some of it is the pride Washington had in McKinley Technical High School. And he's a boy to his father, perhaps, who maybe is nudging his reporter friend to get these little mentions in the paper. But that boy title hangs on a long time. And we get him in Ohio papers as well, where there's a list of all the officers, including Cunningham there. He comes back for a trip home in spring of 1918, and then is off to France. Don't know much about his the war years in France. I haven't found anything talking about those other than his passports. He's applying for passports after his military service. The first time he's applying, and there's a line you have to fill in, when did you last, what was the date of your previous passport? And he fills in, I didn't have one. I was traveling on my military papers, and I came home to New York on my discharge papers. Now I need a passport to go back. And he lists that he had been in the Army in France from July of 18 through June of 19. So through armistice in November and on for another 6 months or more. And then he stays on as a civilian up into 1920, and in fact goes back on this passport till about 22. We know more about, or I know more about what his post-combat career was in France, including with the Army, because the Army sets up a university for the GIs who are not going home yet to get them more prepared for civilian life and perhaps a little foothold on a career back stateside. And he's with this American Expeditionary Force University in rural France, and he is in charge of the industrial and commercial branch of the university. And there's supposedly 5,000 students go through there, according to this account. It's widely reported in American papers. This is a little piece not in one of the Washington papers, but in one in Wisconsin, talking about this university. And Major, by now, he signs up as a captain, but through his Army years here, he's advanced to Major. Major Harry F. Cunningham is in charge of the industrial and commercial branch. In his second application for a passport, and exactly why he needed two in such close succession, I don't know, but I don't care because this one gave me a portrait, and so I'm grateful. And it also contains a fascinating letter where he's writing to apply for this passport on his French architectural letterhead. And he's listing himself in French as an architect and engineer with particular emphasis on the evaluation of the damage of the war. And he engages in a program in France repairing and designing the destroyed villages, and some number in the teens of villages. He claims that he had drawn new plans for these destroyed villages, and then dozens and dozens of farmsteads that he was designing their layout and buildings in these couple years in France. He writes to the passport office on that letterhead and says, my paper, I'll need back the documents I've submitted to you. That's my discharge paper, a receipt for his safe deposit box in Paris. I hope he kept the key. A receipt for the insurance on his office in Paris, and his notification that he's been approved in this Office of Reconstruction project back in France. So he's got a job to go back to. He also lists that he might be doing work in Macedonia, but I don't have anything that says that occurred. But you would list on the passports where you were going to go and what purpose. And he says back to France for the reconstruction of villages, back to Occidental Macedonia for the same. And then that's all crossed off, and somebody writes across it all, personal business. So we get different levels of information, and then his bold signature. And then this passport portrait, and those don't come across very clearly. This is about as good as they get. But here's a young man back from several years in France, the beginning of this work, rebuilding devastated villages. He's 5'9½", which would be just somewhere just a little bit above me. Has a high forehead. Mine's even higher now. But there's our man in about 1920, 21. His family back in the U.S. In the 1920 census, his wife Catherine, Harry, and Catherine Jr. So we've got a Harry Jr. and Catherine Jr. And she'd been born. There seemed to be a publication about the same time of each of the children. The Architectural Review was when the daughter was born, 1916. When Harry Jr. was born was just a little before the measured drawings publication. So he published in more than one way. But they are back with her parents in Virginia, and then she files for divorce, and it's granted in March of 22, cause desertion, which is what most often would be cited. This is a guy desertion an ocean away, so that would have felt much like desertion. And then he's back on his new passport and marries Adele Ferrand in New York City a month after the divorce. So he brings back Adele from France and forms the new family. He opens an office in Washington, D.C. With his brother Joseph Maxon Cunningham, and talks about that he's rebuilt 17 villages in France, and that this is most of his architectural experience, although he had the office experience just before the war as well. Very soon he's engaged in AIA chapter in DC and gets into the kind of back and forth battles and has the same acerbic writing style that we see throughout his life because there are letters to the editor in Lincoln papers in the 50s, when he says the governor's mansion will always look like a stray cat wandering around the beautiful Capitol. Now that there's a stray cat that's sort of the mascot of the Capitol, I don't know what context that puts it in, but he had a sharp pen, and there was a dispute over why New York architects kept getting appointed to the Fine Arts Commission in D.C. Why not people who know something about D.C., like my AIA chapter here? Most often writing on behalf of the profession and the chapter, they don't sound like personal complaints. The big early job he gets coming back is the Burning Tree golf course and clubhouse, and I can't find a really great illustration other than what looks kind of like the placemat, but I did find a matchbook cover, and I think we could identify the left-hand building as probably the one that had his imprint. I didn't go do a Washington visit and try to get onto the 18th green and or 18th hole and take this picture. Someone else can do that as they research Papa Cunningham's cartoons. But then soon, after just a couple of years in D.C., without abandoning, I think, his D.C. practice or interest or clubs, which he was a member of many, he opens an office in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's a boom town. Tourism is expanding there. It's the kind of place young architects look for when they're trying to get work. And right away has a church project, which we can find images of. This is the New Pasadena Community Church. And then particularly gets involved in apartments and hotels. This is Hotel Dennis, which he publishes, and there's some lovely Cunningham drawings, and a drawing that can stand up to the newspaper process and microfilm, and stealing that image off the screen is a pretty darn good drawing, and this is one of those with his signature. That building still stands. It's on the National Register, and it's still a hotel. It was renovated recently as the McCarthy Hotel, but that is Hotel Dennis. And Hotel de Ville the same year. This one, if it got built, no longer stands, but another fine drawing. Now, the scale of hotels that are beginning to be built around St. Pete at that time become bigger and bigger. These would be several $100,000 buildings, then they're talking about $1 million hotels, and then $10 million hotel, apartment, beach, resort complexes, not on his account, they're not on his boards, but that's what's happening around town. He does some residential designs, and this house, well illustrated, is his design. Gets involved in or at least hired for a project that's kind of a vapor project and might cost something like millions of dollars in Tennessee, and he praises the glories of the site, and the project falls apart. Doesn't seem to have ever reached the drawing boards even. But back in D.C., a large number of the D.C. architects have banded together to do federal government work, and they propose and are hired by the commission for the new federal office building, and he's one of the architects in a group. The whole group is something like 55 architects. 17 put in a proposal for the office building, and they're saying, we're going to team up. This is not our individual work. These big federal projects ought to be done by the profession, not by the individual, and he's on that team back in D.C., while he's also very active in Florida. This is another apartment building he did that was built, the Carmack. And then William Steele, at this time of Sioux City, but soon of Omaha, who becomes quite a prominent Omaha architect. For some reason, probably similar reasons to Cunningham's, opens a branch in St. Pete in partnership with Cunningham. I don't know that the two of them produced anything. There are no buildings yet identified, that are Steele, Cunningham, St. Pete work, but their careers stay intertwined quite thoroughly for several years beyond. This is Mr. Steele, and it's in connection with Steele's trying to get the vice presidency of the national AIA at times when Cunningham's trying to get the secretary's post of the national AIA. Neither of them succeed, but they're at it simultaneously in the late 20s. And then Cunningham, by 27, the boom in St. Pete is starting to go down, and he announces that he's leaving in 27. He's been hired by the Goodhue Associates up in New York City. Often it's later cited as 25 when he started working with them. That's not the case, I don't think, because he's active in St. Pete through that time, and he's pretty clearly honored at a dinner by his St. Pete colleagues as he goes up to the big project. And it also matches when the tower gets those delays along the way in the construction of the Nebraska Capitol aren't so much delays as staged and funding matters, that they have to accumulate the resources for each next step. And when they finish the second phase in 25, they're ready then to move on to the third phase only by 27. So that's when he's going up to New York, to the New York office, to be the lead draftsman at the Goodhue Associates. And what's on the boards then is very much the tower. And Cunningham is starting to represent the project and at national conventions at AIA as the St. Louis convention in 28. Steele is vying for the vice presidency, and Cunningham is speaking, opening an exhibition of Goodhue's work and looking at, I think, not just the Capitol, but there's an exhibit at that St. Louis convention on Goodhue, and Cunningham is now a Goodhue expert, which he is because he's up to his eyebrows in that huge tower. I'm not going to try to parse out the differences that occur between the original tower and the tower as built. That always happens in a project, and there's lots of folks that are experts in that. But we can certainly see, we'll get back to what's happening along the way. I don't know how often Cunningham came to Lincoln during the tower construction. I don't find him in the newspapers. It could be he came quietly. There were others on site who were the construction superintendents, and there were very active other figures from the Goodhue Associates on site. He's at the drafting boards clearly back in New York, because Matt Hansen assures me that his initials are on many, many, many drawings, and he's busy doing that, and that they're magnificent drawings. He was a very talented draftsman, but he's not the superintendent on site of construction. That's a different post. But he is back in 30, and there starts to be mention of, we could have an architecture program, not just a couple courses in the engineering college. We could have an architecture program here at the University of Nebraska. Maybe that guy, who's now finished his work largely with, or maybe completely with Goodhue Associates, maybe we can get him. And first mentions I find are in April, early April of 1930, and by April 27th, we get this lovely portrait, architect-elected Nebraska professor. I don't know if professors usually know that they're elected. That's a lovely term, but he's obviously been chosen for the head of the newly organized Department of Architectural Engineering at the University of Nebraska, still within the College of Engineering at that time, but it's the first that there is a separate program identified. They mention in several of these accounts that he had no college degree, which is unusual for an academic hire, and especially to set up a program, but that he has a considerable body of practice, and just down the street is the building everybody is very excited about, and he's very excited about, of having the tower completed. There's a nice account in 31 when a Omaha young journalist interviewed him and produced a little firestorm, but a great article as well, telling us about some of his prior work, his attitude, how he chose to come to Nebraska to this program. And he credits Andy's father with choosing to come to Nebraska, that he was thinking about this, got in touch with his son and said, do you want to come and study here? It was age appropriate. It was a college visit by letter, and his son said, sure. And so he comes and graduates and becomes a Rhodes Scholar. So it wasn't a bad call by Harry Jr. But he credits his son with, well, I talked to the family, and my son said he would be pleased to come, and so he does. He often cites the Capitol, not just in how he caught the attention of the university, but that the Capitol will be the spirit of the architecture college. And it's kind of a look at what we can do, look at what architecture can produce. And that's a reaction not just of the man doing those beautiful drawings and helping get it built, but of everybody else who comes to town. There's a wonderful exchange between Cunningham and H. Van Buren McGonigal, the architect of First Plymouth, that they both visit and comment on the other's tower. And McGonigal comes to town and says, I got a tour from the basement to the tower twice, and it's the best work of American architecture yet. And then we'll get to a mention where Cunningham is speaking to the pastor at First Plymouth about his opinion of that building, and I'll show you that in a minute. But he says that this is what will inspire our college. He also has an interesting view where he'll say it's going to be a great place for a college because they know so little here. I don't have to correct anything. He could not really have been a great friend of the local architecture profession. And when you think of who's here in 1930, those unwashed Ellery Davis with his Harvard or his Columbia degree, and his partner Wilson, even back to old Mr. Fisk, who's about to die in 1930, but he's a Cornell grad with 40 years of successful practice. They're not all rubes, but it's kind of the approach he takes, saying this will be so fun because these energetic, uninformed farm boys, and he's always talking about, he looking back to his military experience, he likes working with young men. And at that time, very few young women are being admitted to the college, if any. This is a little comparison of the two towers, the original the original competition submission by Goodhue, and the tower as finished. And there certainly are differences along the way, but one of them is on paper, and the other one's built. But there are refinements and changes along the way, as there would be whoever is doing it. Cunningham emphasized that he was trying to embody the spirit of Goodhue. And I think he had enormous respect for Goodhue. And when he oversteps sometimes, it's maybe that he thought he was Goodhue at certain moments along the way, in the way he spoke about it. Goodhue certainly was the principal author of this spectacular building, but then everybody who had a hand in it, and he partly says he took the university job because he'd never have another building anywhere near as wonderful as working on the Capitol. Now it was time to teach. He doesn't teach for real long, but it is a wonderful opening approach. He also publishes a nice little book on the Capitol as finished, not quite finished totally, because the book's 31, but it's for the Capitol Commission, and it mostly is kind of his ode to the building, and contains this wonderful centerfold. You kind of see the rusty staples and must have been a little humble stapled publication. And he's taking a view to get the Capitol at the proper setting. The little note underneath says, general view of the Capitol from atop the University Club roof garden. So he's up on top of the Stewart Building, as we University Towers today, looking over towards the Capitol to get not a perspective looking up that very tall 400-foot building, but looking across to get this kind of lovely view. They opened the university program in the fall of 1930 to great enrollment and excitement. They cite that there are 18 courses in the catalog, and Herminghaus is teaching landscape architecture. Professor W.G. Hill is teaching 2 courses, and Cunningham's teaching the other 15. And they get 80 students right away, but their total enrollment among the various courses becomes much larger than that in a hurry. He also is quoted widely across the state, and this is a piece from a Scottsbluff newspaper, so there's attention being paid both to the Capitol and the new guy at the university, with Cunningham saying he came here to be near that Capitol building, which I truly believe be the greatest thing I will ever have any connection with. There are students who thought at the time and who believe still today that tearing down one block of buildings on every side of it would put it in a better setting, and that's what he thought. That's what Cunningham thought as well. That's a lot of buildings. This is his little note to Benjamin Wayland, the pastor at First Plymouth, about their church going up. That he says of the tower, the forms, of course, are perfect. The choice of materials and the combination of materials, most happy. The tower will be a fitting mate in a more friendly, intimate fashion to the Capitol Tower. I put a bit of my own heart into the Capitol Tower. My weary old heart is happy indeed to see this glorious tower of McGonagall's rising up in the shadow of that one that is partly mine, and singing as it rises. So he could also turn that pen quite sweet when he set to do it, and I think the comparison between these two buildings, which is such fun because McGonagall had competed for the Capitol design and didn't offer a tower, but was really good with towers as well. He did the Liberty Memorial in Kansas City, and I see him coming back grateful, I think, that he had the chance to do another great tower, the second best tower in Lincoln, and that's honor, not shame. This is the article of 31, when he talks to a young reporter who really produces a quite magnificent article, but uses his language kind of loosely, and maybe Cunningham did as well, because immediately there is a letter, a telegram fired back to the World Herald from the Goodhue Associates. The firm had reorganized under the names of the principals rather than Goodhue, saying he can't claim design credit for the Capitol Tower or all those other buildings from the Goodhue Associates that he was involved in. That's not how it happens. And it's a very tart response, to which he pens a 3-page letter to the editor to the World Herald. And then Mr. Kimball, Thomas Rogers Kimball, who had been the overall advisor to the Capitol Commission and the Capitol construction process, sits him down and says, see here, when you're working within a firm, the firm is credited with the work. And he pens a very short apologetic withdrawal of the fiery letter to say, yes, it was wonderful to be on this project. It's a Goodhue Associates project. It's the honor of my life to have been involved in it. And he comes back down to earth. Kimball continuing to serve the Capitol project, and everybody in the profession in this little set to. He must have been, he kind of also, to a small degree, throws the reporter under the bus, saying, he was just a young guy, and I really liked him, and I wanted to help him with an exciting story. And I've also provided him with drawings of what I built in Florida, and this elaborate drawing of what that skyscraper in the caption is credited to be 1919 Cunningham's vision for the Italian Center in New York City. I don't know what that is, and I don't know that I have to go down that rabbit hole, but I think in this article it's implying that I was thinking of very tall, majestic buildings on my own well before I got to Lincoln and the Goodhue Tower, and also a wonderful portrait of him. The little piece he's kind of peering over in the profile is one of the courtyards of that Spanish-style house in St. Pete. And then, seemingly kind of suddenly, in the early semester, what would have been the spring semester of 1934, after having completed 3 complete academic years and only half of the 4th year, he announces he's leaving back for the East Coast. And as far as I can tell, the program's a bit adrift for that spring semester, because he announces it in January, and he announces it as, I'm out of here. So who was teaching those 15 courses that spring, if they were even held, is not clear. There is mention in one of the articles that we're not sure who the replacement will be, but we're talking to someone who might be suitable, and it quickly becomes clear, because it's announced by June, the end of the spring semester, that Linus Burr Smith from Kansas State in Manhattan, who has a bachelor's from Kansas State, who has a master's from Harvard, and has been teaching for 6 or 7 years in the Kansas State program, is coming up to Lincoln, where he stays for decades. And it's perfectly appropriate that it is the Harry Francis Cunningham Medal. And if it weren't that, it'd be the Linus Burr Smith Medal, or maybe it could be the back side. Medals have 2 sides. You could always honor more. Back in D.C., which is where Cunningham goes, he doesn't build this house, which is the Brazilian ambassador's residence, and is John. I'm stumbling on it. It is John Russell Pope, who had designed this house as a private mansion, then it's bought by the Brazilian government. But out back of it, the Chancery, the office building of the Brazilian embassy, is by Cunningham, and gets an award in '38 from the D.C. Board of Trade. There is a spectacular and much published Chancery building for the Brazilian embassy that happens to be built in 1971. It's the one that replaced the Cunningham, and I haven't been able to find an image of this rather substantial, single-story but big footprint office building that he had provided behind this building. He continues to be active in the professional chapters, and this, as a speaker, is one of the things you can't avoid. He's at a meeting and all 3 speakers don't show up, so he has to fill in. Does some large apartment buildings in that period, but the most exciting project, or most notorious project, is the German embassy, which had been discussed before World War I, when drawings like this were produced of what the German embassy in D.C. might look like, and then isn't built because of World War I. And then there's much discussion in the mid-30s about building, finally, a German embassy, and the Durkhoffs, the ambassador and his wife, are quite popular in D.C. society, and she's particularly popular both with D.C. society and with Adolf Hitler, who she goes to convince we really do need a decent embassy in D.C. And a drawing is produced, and all we really know of it is it will be a 3-story stone mansion, 6 square double columns in the facade below the Third Reich symbols. So apparently there was a drawing, somebody's seen it, I've not yet. What it might have looked like, the same fellow as did the very elaborate pre-World War I embassy was a prominent German architect. This was his design for the Danish embassy. This is Emil Strout. And this is the Danish embassy being designed just at the time that they're talking about the one in Washington. And this doesn't have 6 square columns, it has 8. It's now a hotel. They get it built, and then the war breaks out. The German government uses it. Finally, Denmark gets it back in the mid-40s, and there is that porch with 6 paired columns. I don't know this is what the embassy was supposed to look like, but it might have been. Cunningham was hired to be the on-site associate architect to get it built, and they start exchanging drawings, and then he can't get any response back. He can't get a signed contract back from the Germans. He's getting no interaction, and the Germans start invading other countries in Europe, and he wisely withdraws from the project with language that makes it real definite he's not going to be rehired. He says, I can't work for them. They're not workable. They don't honor contracts, obviously, as they're taking over Czechoslovakia. And he even kind of goes viral all over the country. There are little mentions of him saying, I'm withdrawing from this project in protest. These Germans just don't honor contracts, which is sort of as understated as you can be for what's happening in Europe. And he gets published around the country for that succinct, understated, and I think also for his, if he looks angry, he looks angry. This is from one of those articles. Goes back in the Army, 39, in intelligence and strategic planning, is involved in some of the actions in North Africa, and is back visiting home an account of, I got by mail a picture of my friend, French general of the French Free Fighting Force, Lautrec, who has made this famous trek across the Libyan desert, Cunningham along. And he says, I got a portrait from Lautrec. It's a back.
Or Leclerc, yeah, Leclerc.
You say it. Leclerc. And it's his backside. And the note on it says, this is the side of me the Germans never saw. So, there are a couple of fierce warriors together. Comes back to Lincoln after the war. He's retired from the Army, finally registers as a Nebraska architect in 39 or 49, and this is his registration portrait. Builds a lovely, rather sprawling house, although I think it's got an addition on it now, but that house at 2700 Sheridan Boulevard, which is always pointed out as Colonel Cunningham's house, it was for 1 year, and then the bank took it back. And the next occupants bought it from a sheriff's sale on the courthouse steps. That's what happens when you can't pay your mortgage. So apparently overbuilt, moved into an apartment just up the street, perhaps because he's working on the Westminster Memorial Chapel construction just up the street. Goes back to school, maybe conscious that he's missing those degrees, studies political science, and according to several accounts, gets a master's by 53. He also is preparing to run for regent, and he's saying, I'm totally retired, I'm an architect, I'm a military officer, I'm a graduate of your university just now, and I'd be a fine regent. He is not elected. He runs for the school board in 55, is not elected. Goes back to the drawing board, rather remarkably, not where you'd expect to find him. He does the Strauss Brothers Trend Home of 1957 and is cited widely and illustrated in the papers with this ranch home in that kind of affordable Eastridge development, where he and Adele move into Margot Street as their last residence, and then he dies in 59 and has his military stone at Wayuga Cemetery in the Soldiers' Circle. And that's all I know about Cunningham, and some of it is true.